Putin News Now. Many African groups actively pursue conflict-free resolutions. The author covers African news for the Portuguese Communist Party's newspaper, Avante. He or she is a former member of the Secretariat of the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, PAIGC. John Catalinotto, translating. In an effort to coordinate peace initiatives regarding the situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the heads of 4 African organizations met this week in Luanda, Angola. State leaders from the East African Community, the Economic Community of Central African States, the International Conference on the Great Lakes Region, and the Southern African Development Community were all present, as were representatives from the African Union and observers from the United Nations. The foreign, defense, and interior ministers of the participating countries met in advance of the quadripartite forum to discuss the coordination of efforts necessary to bring peace to eastern Congo. This former Belgian colony has been beset by interference, coups, aggressions, and wars, particularly in the east of its vast territory, for decades due to the greed aroused by its immense natural wealth. In an effort to finally silence the weapons in Africa, as was pledged at this summit, African nations have taken yet another positive step toward that end. But African states are increasingly intervening in the search for peace not only in Africa but also in other parts of the world, while demanding greater and better representation in multilateral organizations like the United Nations Security Council and demanding the reform of institutions at the service of the great Western powers, like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The African mission that traveled to Kiev and Moscow to help end the conflict in Ukraine is one such example. Because of this conflict, the export of Russian grain and fertilizers to countries on the African continent has been halted, and the conflict has the potential to escalate into a war of even greater proportions. The mission included Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouly of Egypt, representatives from Uganda and Congo, and Presidents Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, Macky Sall of Senegal, Hakainde Hichilema of Zambia, and Azali Assoumani of the Comoros and the African Union. We had a meeting with Zelensky and then with Putin on the mission. The group met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on June 16 in Kiev, and Russian President Vladimir Putin the following day, June 17, in Moscow. It proposed a 10-point plan for ending the crisis, including security guarantees, unimpeded grain transport through the Black Sea, the return of captured soldiers, and the initiation of negotiations between the warring parties. For Ramaphosa, the African leader's proposal established the basis for future interactions that will help find the path to peace and resolve this devastating conflict. Putin said Russia welcomes the balanced approach to the conflict by African countries, and that developing relations with African states is a priority for Moscow. African and Russian diplomats have been working together to put together an event that will take place in St. Petersburg, Russia, from July 26 to 29, called the Second Russia-Africa Summit and an Economic and Humanitarian Forum. It will be a chance for Africa to keep contributing to the quest for global peace and a chance to strengthen the already strong Russian-African cooperation. The turmoil that Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine has caused in tennis locker rooms is on full display as Wimbledon begins. Ukrainian tennis players want the rest of the world to know, "We are not kidding." As the world's best players struggle through the first week of Wimbledon, the sport of tennis is struggling with how to deal with the influx of talented Russian players at the highest levels. The athletes of Ukraine feel let down by the sport as a whole. Some Russian athletes have been vocal supporters of President Vladimir Putin's brutal war in Ukraine, and there are connections between a top Russian star and a company that is funding the Kremlin's aggression. The family of a Russian Olympic tennis gold medalist is also connected to a tournament named after a mercenary fighter from the Wagner Group. Karen Khachanov, the current number 11 male tennis player in the world, confronted Andrei Rublev, a fellow Russian who had previously expressed a desire for peace between Russia and Ukraine by writing, "No war please," on a TV camera lens in February, as Putin sent his forces toward Kyiv. One locker room figure who was aware of the argument claimed that Kachanov argued that negotiations with the weaker side should not be conducted from a position of strength. He yelled that Russia should use the conflict in Ukraine to prove its might and greatness to the world. Kachanov, when asked about the confrontation by this journalist, adopted the standard response of athletes in similar situations: "I don't want to get into politics. It was just the two of us talking." He emphasized that he was a sportsman and not a politician. The feud, which has not been widely publicized until now, reveals the extent to which some of Russia's most prominent tennis players back Putin's offensive in Ukraine, which has destroyed entire cities, killed thousands of civilians, and resulted in war crimes. Many Russian and Belarusian tennis players now participate in international tournaments, which has upset Ukrainian players whose families are currently under threat from Russian missiles and killer drones. World number 60 Lesya Surenko, who is advancing to the third round of Wimbledon, told Politico that the biggest stress for us was the fact of the invasion itself, so seeing representatives of these countries nearby has been difficult. That's why we requested the WTA's top brass explain where they stand on the issue of players representing aggressor nations. We needed knowledge of our surroundings. For blood money from Gazprom, many players have participated in exhibition tournaments, and many more players simply enjoy and spread propaganda. However, WTA head Steve Simon taught me that backing the war is fine. It's typical. Just as he said, it's all in their head. And I have no reason to be upset, Surenko continued. Nobody cares about how we feel morally. Seeing people at tournaments who openly support Russian aggression is very stressful for me. We reached out to the WTA several times for comment on Surenko's comments, but did not receive a response in time for inclusion in this article. As of this year, Russian and Belarusian players will be allowed to compete in Wimbledon, the prestigious grass court tournament in southwest London, provided they sign a waiver stating they do not support the Putin regime. While Kachanov was injured and unable to participate in the tournament at the French Open, 18 other players from Russia and Belarus participated in the tournament's singles draws. Polish women's tennis world number 1 Iga Swiatek thinks the sport could do a bit better. Fight over Tatneft. Veronika Kudermetova, the number 12 seeded woman in the Wimbledon women's draw, has a direct connection to Russian business, sports, and politics, despite the often murky nature of these ties. Tatneft, a Russian fossil fuel company based in Tatarstan, a region between Moscow and the Ural Mountains, is Kudermetova's primary sponsor. Tatneft and its subsidiary, management company Tatneft Neftekhim LLC, have been sanctioned by the European Union for allegedly providing fuel and tires to the Russian armed forces. Since 2021, and all through the war at tournaments in Sydney, Dubai, and Madrid, Kudermetova has prominently displayed the Tatneft logo on her clothing. Kudermetova has publicly thanked Tatneft and Rustam Minikhanov, the president of Tatarstan, for their support in achieving results that have taken her into the world top 10. The regional boss in Tatarstan, Minikhanov, who controls the oil industry entirely, has flaunted his tens of millions of dollars in investments in the Kremlin's war machine. After learning that Tatneft would be discussed, Kudermetova declined an interview request from Politico during a tournament in the Netherlands in June. She has previously stated that she did not break any rules by wearing the badge, but she has decided to take it off for Wimbledon after winning her first-round match on Monday. The Women's Tennis Association, the sport's primary organizing body, told Politico last month that it has no say over the endorsements made by tour players. In the past, Steve Simon has said, "We continue to speak with Russian and Belarusian players, and make sure they understand about the sensitivities here and that they are competing as neutral athletes." Every Russian and Belarusian player at Wimbledon has signed a document promising to compete as a neutral athlete and to follow the neutrality principles set forth by the United Kingdom government, according to the All England Lawn Tennis Club, which hosts the championships. Kudermetova took off the Tatneft logo for the recent French Open, and she also didn't wear it during her early exit from Wimbledon. In memory of Wagner, Russian tennis authorities have backed the Wagner Group, which participated in the Bakhmut meat grinder, and attempted a bloody, failed mutiny against Putin last month. The father of Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova, a women's tour player who won gold in mixed doubles at the 2021 Summer Olympics in Tokyo, sponsored a Russian junior tennis tournament in honor of a mercenary who fought and died for warlord Yevgeny Prigozhin's unit. Pavlyuchenkova comes from a family with strong ties to the Kremlin.